Welcome back then folks to the second build of day 2 in pack number 18 of special projects, and for some of you this is one of the more intriguing builds. Maybe some of you haven't heard of the car, some of you might be familiar with it and thinking that's going to be a hell of a handful to drive. It's a road-going version, believe it or not, of the Porsche 917K. The funny thing is, that's not fictional. It was real. It's an actual real car. I've seen it in person at Goodwood, owned by a Count Rossi. He purchased an ex-Porsche 917 race car. I believe it was a 71 model, if I recall. And I think it might have been something like the first one that they tested ABS brakes on, or something like that. And it was a race-proven vehicle. I believe it was an ex-Martini liveried vehicle. And they turned it into a road car. It has a leather interior. It has a massive, apparently, exhaust silencer. Of course, it has number plates, which, unfortunately, we can't do here in the game. And as I said, he still shows up to events like Goodwood. I think he did like a couple 1,000-mile journey in it across America. It has a wild story that's definitely worth checking out. So, the good and the bad news is, well, bad first, it's a hell of an expensive car to do a build on. Of course, so many of you probably won't have it. But, for those who do already have it, you don't need to buy a second one, because you could just download the livery and add it to your collection. And then you can actually do this build just as like a second build sheet. You don't need to fit anything that isn't reversible. So you could kind of have it as two cars in one if you wanted to. Now, of course, a ton of people have done this livery. I like this particular one because, you know, the little Goodwood stickers, stuff like that, it's a nice addition. So give them some support if you want to grab that livery. As far as the actual parts, some things you could probably assume, like the kind of tyres we're using, that sort of stuff. And as you can see, 665 points. For what is still a 600 horsepower car that barely weighs 800 kilos, that's a hell of a spec sheet for a road car, and of course that's a lovely advantage of the completely broken ranking system in Gran Turismo, where this doesn't have any kind of group or, you know, historic category applied to it. It's just a road car for all intents and purposes anyway, which is a nice advantage. In fact, making it technically a lot more usable than the Dower 962 road car, which I built way back. Now, as far as the specs, we are using real life as a rough reference. Horsepower-wise, it's about 600, I believe, like the real-life car. I've actually heard 620 in real life, so again, you'll have to adjust it as you will. I did fit some comfort softs to see what it would be like. Yeah, that was a bit too leery, so I went for sports hards instead. And as far as the rest of the stuff, we've got the power restrictor and the ballast. I fit that to a lot of my race cars anyway. The fully customized computer, of course, the diff. I haven't actually bothered with stuff like the body rigidity or the manual transmission. As far as the racing stuff, we've got the racing brakes. I don't recall if it has those already though. That may well be the case. Of course, the suspension, the transmission, the racing hards are already from a previous state of build, so you don't need that, unless of course you're going to do it anyway. I've opted not to bother with the steering angle because, you know, it's not the kind of car that would have had that. And for the ultimate stuff, well, there's really nothing to do there. So it's a pretty simple build. It's actually a really easy one to do, aside from just having all the cash to buy the car in the first place, in the case of many players. Then if we jump into the garage, to go back to my point on using real-life specs, I wasn't actually able to find what the vehicle weighs. But the reason why I've added 30 kilos to it is because, if you think about it, I already mentioned it has that fully padded, like tan leather interior, which adds some weight. I'm going to be generous and say maybe like 15-20 kilos. And then it has that massive exhaust muffler. Take it from someone who has taken a couple of mufflers off of my own cars. They're heavier than they look, so especially a big one. It could be 10, 15, 20 kilos in some cases. So if they've added a huge one, that is going to add up. So to me, 30 kilos, that should be probably about right to what the real car would weigh. Of course, I stand corrected if anyone wants to find the real number, but to me that sounds reasonable for what the car should be. As far as the suspension, a bit of a disparity between the front and the back, but as you can see, doesn't exactly look like a snowplow. So 60 on the front, 80 on the rear, 6 for anti-roll, 25 and 35 for the dampers, 3.65 on the springs, a heck of a lot less camber than you were probably expecting at 1 degree. And then as far as the toe in 30 on the rear and 5 out on the front. Again, probably less toe on the front than you'd be expecting. 10, 30 and 30 on the diff. As far as the transmission, like I said, I've left that standard. I kind of love having that just old school 4-speed as well. As far as the ballast, like I said, 30 kilos. I've actually put that all the way to the front. I guess you could make an argument that it should probably be closer to the middle, given that the interior is where the weight is added and then the exhaust is at the back with the new muffler. So do with that as you will. You could change that if you want to be even more realistic. As far as the downforce, I've set it a bit lower, because again, it's in road car form, and one of the changes in real life was that I believe some of the small wind vanes were removed from the car, so it probably does have a bit less downforce than the actual racing version, if I had to guess. So I've set it on 100, and that's pretty much it. So of course all that's left to do is jump out on the track and show you what it can do in practice. Now it only seemed appropriate, unfortunately we don't have Goodwood Hill in this game, but we do have Goodwood Motor Circuit, and I'm sure this car has probably been around the Goodwood Motor Circuit at least a couple of times in its new life. But yeah, it's a hell of a thing. It's probably one of the most badass road-going Le Mans cars ever, even including the officially homologated GT1 style stuff. This is a very, very cool car. I wanted this build to be kind of two things in one. Number one, to be this kind of interpretation of what the road car could be like, but also more so because I know a lot of people find this a bit of a challenging car. If I recall, I think it's, what is it, a license mission or a driving mission, something like that, where you drive this thing in the rain at Spa, I think it is. This tune is designed to make it more useful and more friendly, not as wild of a car to drive. It still can certainly bite back, as I'm sure the real life car can as well, but yeah, if you've got one, if maybe you don't use it as much as you wish you did, then this could be more useful for career mode. Certainly if you think about it, for under 700 point events, it's a hell of a machine. Certainly if you want a bit of a throwback challenge. So if you decide to use it, I hope of course you have a ton of fun with it. Check out the builds which we've already done, all of which are pretty much more affordable than this one, and of course the ones still to come for the rest of the week. But for now, thanks for watching.